Chief Webster. Chief Webster. Chief Webster. Nice try.
There's a lot of microphones.
Chief Calhoun, Chief Webster, please.
I thought the podium was for holding paper, not microphones. Shift things around a touch here. Okay, well, good morning. My name is Greg Castle. I'm the fire chief of the Clark County Fire Department. And we're having this press conference today to discuss the fire and EMS response issues to the event that occurred Sunday night at the Mandalay Bay. Standing behind me are people that I truly love and respect. Members of my staff, members of other fire departments are here because we have, and I'll talk about the training we've done later and the preparation as a community to handle events of any magnitude, and it's very important for me. I asked them to be here because I want to show that unity in the fire service across the board. And also our friends and partners from Metro. We love to make fun of each other. We have some incredibly good laughs, but these four gentlemen specifically right here are wonderful friends to us. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Now, I'm going to go over some recap. I'm going to go over some information, and I'll take some questions at the end. I will at some point in time throw an end to questions because I know that we have to get this over with, and I've seen how these things go, and people ask a lot of questions that really don't need to be asked. So with that said, I do want to introduce two people here to my right. Fire Captain Steve Thompson. He's the president of Fire International Association of Firefighters Local 1908. They are the representative group for Clark County Fire Department firefighters. And to my left here is Deputy Chief Roy Sessions. He's our operations chief. He's the gentleman for me that takes care of everything that's got a siren on this organization and rolls down the road to handle the business of our organization and our community. They all fall under him as his responsibility. So with that said, we all know that on Sunday night, something that we did not foresee at the magnitude of which it was took place in our valley at one of our outdoor venues. We had more than 520 people injured, 58 deceased citizens as a result of that incident, and more than 200 patients transported to area hospitals by EMS crews, some by fire crews, some by EMS crews. Our hospitals saw over 500 patients. It's amazing the amount of work that took place at those hospitals, the dedication of those doctors, those nurses, and the staffs at those facilities that did such a great job. We had a lot of challenges with this event, with this incident. And the challenges we had were because of how complicated things were on where this venue was and how the people immediately, and rightfully so, began to extract themselves from the danger area. We had more than 32 reports of gunshot victims coming into our fire alarm office, which created 32 separate incidents instead of one main one. And that's common in an event like this because they're just getting calls of this and this person shot here, this person shot here. It took them a while to tie into hey, this is all under one incident number. So we have 32 incident numbers tied to this, and we're still trying to crunch that data into one usable format. We also had reports of, people would show up at hotels, say Caesar's Palace or other places where they were shot. Well, by the time that information got relayed out to responders, both police and fire, there's a shooter at this location. Where there wasn't a shooter at that location, there was just somebody that was shot that showed up at that location via Uber or running or whatever. So that complicated our response. And so for a certain amount of time that evening, we knew we had what was going on at the concert venue, and we're starting to think, are we having attacks at other locations? Again, our police officers, both Metro, I saw strike teams out there that night from Henderson PD, from North Vegas PD. They all came together as we have trained, and they addressed every one of those other sites that turned out not to be shootings, but just where victims ended up. We also had people jump the fence, break through the fences, and get into the airport property. They were laying in between the runways trying to take cover because those areas are carved out between the runways and the taxiways. And then we had reports of gunshots fired at the airports. There's another example of we had a lot on our hands. A lot we thought was escalating when it was really contained, but we just didn't know because of so many calls coming in. We had to vet every one of those things out with a police response and a fire response. This is also the first time that we've deployed a rescue task force on a significant event. And we'll talk about what the rescue task force component is in a little bit, but it's something that's been worked on in this valley for many, many years. At the event, there was a standby crew of approximately 16 EMS paramedic personnel from Community Ambulance. They performed wonderfully under fire, literally under fire, taking care of patients that were right there in front of them in a very bad situation. So my hat's off to that standby EMS crew that was taking care of people there. There were also numerous civilians and off-duty fire and EMS personnel, not only from the local area but from around the country, that immediately enacted what they're trained on. They started treating patients. They started helping people extract. They started doing the things that they were trained on, even though they were off-duty. Some of the gentlemen sitting in the front row today are members of my organization and our organization. I don't always take it personal, it's mine, but our organization that were there either as responders or concert goers that went into action that night. I have purposely, Monday morning, issued somewhat of a gag order to my organization. I did it again, right? To my organization to not speak to the media because this was a very, very traumatic event. We have people that are hurt from this event psychologically. And I did not want them to be addressed by the media. I did not want them to have to relive that immediately. We wanted them to go home. We wanted them to see their wives, their girlfriends, their parents, their kids. We wanted them to hug those people. We wanted them to decompress. And we wanted to control the opportunity for the media to interact with our people. And that's why we're here today. We're going to allow that after this event. You will be able to speak to members of our organization. As far as our organization goes, Clark County Fire Department, we've been somewhat planning on a major event in our valley for an awful long time along these lines. About 2010, we were one of the first organizations in the country to place one of our fire captains into the Fusion Center, the multi-agency counterterrorism fusion center hosted by Las Vegas Metro. Through that, we've built relationships, we've developed response plans, we've met the community on many different fronts, and we were able to build out a program to handle situations such as this. We also were first to have a deputy chief, foreseeing what was coming down the road in 2015. I promoted a deputy chief position from the battalion chief ranks, which is Deputy Chief Scott Webster right here. And all he does nothing with the fire anymore. He has absolutely no responsibilities. His responsibilities are law enforcement integration, dealing with strict security executives and teams. How do we integrate with them? How do we get in and out of your properties? How do we help you stay safe? And doing counterterrorism work with the Fusion Center and the MACTEC group, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Through that stuff, we began training our personnel. We were building a policy that had never been built before. We built this policy and we've shared it nationwide. And it took an awful long time. It took years. We developed plans, we'd run drills and find out what was wrong. We'd come back to the table, we'd redesign it, go back out, do it again, and it took us repetitive cycles over years to get it to where we thought this is the format we want. It works in drills. This valley-wide policy is shared among all police and law enforcement agencies. Las Vegas Metro's MACTEC unit, these gentlemen right here, trained all the other police agencies in town, including they trained with FBI, tribal police. All the police agencies in town are all trained to the same level of what they call MACTEC integration. I want to introduce Sergeant Clarkson from Metro. He's the head of the MACTEC division right now. Officers Bert Hughes, Dean Hennessy, and Bobby Chamberlain. They have been by our side through and through. And there's another gentleman that I would be remiss if I did not mention because he was driving this really hard at the front end and he's retired now. His name's Joel Martin. He was a lieutenant at Metro and he was sort of the big driving force at getting this going back in the early 2010, 2011 area. So once the plan was built, we started running multi-jurisdictional drills. We've run drills at hotels, we've run drills at hospitals, we've run drills in schools, malls, and all kinds of things, because that's where historically these things are taking place. We never planned on what happened the other night. However, our training, our equipment, and the professionalism of our people took all of that and responded to that event the other night because it was not anything that we planned on, an open venue, and patients, critically and mortally wounded patients, from Tropicana to Russell and some as far as Blue Diamond. It was not in one building, it was not in one spot, it was not in one address. It was spread over a massive area. We utilized our incident command system. It's a system that's utilized across the country to manage events. It gives us the ability to have one person in charge or two people tied together, a police officer and a fire chief in this incident, to run the incident, to work together, to bring the right resources together, and to limit the confusion of what one entity is requesting and what one entity is providing. Unified Incident Command saved lives. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the fact that we were standing toe-to-toe, shoulder-to-shoulder with police officers at the battalion chief level and the lieutenant and captain level at the police department to integrate our response was critical. We've also performed reality-based training where we've been in the situations with the police officers when they're engaging people as targets and training targets with their weapons. So some of our people have been around actual simulated gunfire with blanks during these events. So we've gone up and beyond, as far as I can tell, especially speaking to fellow fire chiefs across the country. They're very impressed. The one, we even talked to the cops. We love our cops, and they love us. And then so that paid off for us the other night in a way that we'd hoped if we ever needed it, but we never really wanted to have to use it. So as far as the response that night, our response time to that incident, I can honestly say, for our first arriving unit was less than 5 seconds. And the reason I say that is Fire Engine 11, who's stationed about a mile south on Las Vegas Boulevard, was coming back from a traffic accident call. They had hooked left on Reno, headed east, turned onto Giles, and the captain's like, that's gunfire. They were right there at the fence to the event. The captain picked up the radio and said, "Dispatch, do you have any reports of gunfire and something going on right now? Because I'm hearing a lot of gunfire." They said, "No." "Oh, yes, now we do." It was that fast. The floodgates opened on Giles and out poured dozens and dozens and dozens of patients, critically, some mortally wounded, and swamped that engine company sitting in the middle of the street. So our first hands-on patients was just outside the fence on the east side of that venue, and our people did a great job. That captain, his name's Ken O'Shaughnessy, immediately called for what we call a first alarm medical assignment, which brings many, many different units, engine companies, truck companies, battalion chiefs, more ambulances, and he called, probably one of the most important things he called for separately, was our mass casualty unit, which we have outside today, and you'll have an opportunity to see, walk around, and look at what we have prepared to respond to events like this in our community. We also had, I just said, 32 other calls. We had 32 other calls, and these calls are coming in, and dispatch is sending units to those calls. So we have the medical alarm coming, and then we have other units coming in to try to get to those other calls. So now our responding resources, because we're overtaxed at that point in time, are coming from 8, 10, 15 minutes away, because they're coming from stations as far away as DI and Topaz. They're coming from City Las Vegas. They're coming from farther areas. So we had to get our people down there. Those units that were inbound on that medical alarm by Captain O'Shaughnessy and the crew of Engine 11 were beginning to spin things up on the east side of that venue. They encountered all those patients in every direction fleeing. They were stopped. There was people dying. They dealt with them. There were people critically wounded. They called for ambulances. They got them out the doors, got them in the ambulances, got them to the hospitals as best they could. Branches, we'll talk about the incident command system, so I'll expand on that just a touch. Branches were formed. So you have an incident commander, and underneath the incident commander, we form branches. We had a south branch, and that's a geographical area that that person is put in charge of. They request resources, and they manage their event. So we had a south branch, we had a north branch, and we had an east branch. That's how we manage the situation. That's how we try to calm the chaos, so to speak, when things are going south. So now I'm going to reach into some of our equipment that we carry on our vehicles here. We were able to get this equipment years ago through some grant money to put on every single rolling piece of fire apparatus in southern Nevada, from Mesquite to North Vegas to Boulder City to Clark County. Everything rolling down the road that's a fire apparatus has this stuff on it. Level 4 ballistic vests for our people. Those are able to stop rifle rounds. Level 3 ballistic helmets, able to stop handgun rounds. And then this fanny pack system right here, designed to treat upwards of 20 critically wounded patients. Things such as chest seals for gunshot wounds to the chest, long needles to help lungs reinflate after they've collapsed because of air or blood, different airway maneuvers, and a tagging system that's unique outside of our normal triage systems. We call it sifting and sorting. We have placed this stuff on our units. We have trained on it relentlessly. Well, tourniquets, a lot of tourniquets in there too is a big part of that. We've trained on it relentlessly, and I have to harp on this over and over. Our training paid off. Our training paid off because we knew what to do, It was much grander than we ever envisioned. However, we were able to handle it because of our people, our training, our professionalism, and our equipment, and our relationships. So the MACTAC group, I talked about that. It's the Multi-Assault Counterterrorism Action Capabilities from Metro. They've been, as I mentioned, they've been with us side by side through this whole thing. We've been doing drills with them, and basically, in a nutshell, I won't get into how it's actually deployed, but we sat down with all the area firefighters years ago and said, we are going to integrate with the police department to get into people in hostile situations and control their bleeding, control their airway to save lives. Because we've learned the lessons from Columbine, we've learned the lessons from Aurora, and we, as an industry, have to move forward. And Clark County Fire and the Southern Nevada Fire Departments led that for this entire nation. Led by two people that I'm going to point out, they're going to be mad. Kittleson, Captain Kittleson, standing in the back room, he's very humble. He doesn't want to be recognized. And Captain Evan Hanna, standing in the back. Those two gentlemen, for the last 4 or 5 years, they've drove this boat. They've drove it from the fire department side of the fence with the police department and built this system along with the hostile MCI committee that came together to vet everything out. They've done this. They acquired the equipment through grant funding. They built this thing, and I told them yesterday, at some point in time, the enormity of what you have done for the United States Fire Service is going to hit them. Because what we're going to be writing in reports and what we're going to be sending up as a result of this incident is going to end up on Capitol Hill, on DHS, and the Department of Justice. So the work they've done and the work we've done collectively as a whole is going to change the fire service across the country and the way we integrate with our law enforcement partners on critical events. So at this point in time, I'll take a few questions regarding the incident that night, some of our responses, and again, like I said, at some point in time, I'm going to call the questions off. I do respectfully ask, as you deal with the men that are sitting down here in front of me today, that you don't swarm them. They came back today. We had some meetings yesterday to talk about where we are as an organization, what we need to do to go forward mentally and psychologically to get better and stay healthy so we can have long, worthwhile careers. So please don't overwhelm them. They came back today specifically knowing that they are going to be at the throngs of the media. They're going to want to talk to you. They're going to want to interview you. They're going to want your story. And I want them to share their story because I know it's a healing part of the process. We had 108 firefighters there that night. Okay? We had 14 chief officers that all teamed up and did a tremendous amount of work to get this taken care of. And these guys are ready to talk. So with that, I'll take a few questions. Sir.
I worked with a couple of you guys last year on the active shooter situation and some of the training that went into that.
Yes.
At City Hall and then over at the police headquarters here. How much of that training came in handy on Sunday night?
That training was, you know, it's very handy. It's not, I'm going to say handy, it's very important. That's exactly what we did. That was we formed 16 rescue task forces that night. And that's the rescue task force where we take 4 firefighters and 3 or 4 police officers and we put them into a group and we send them out. And those task forces that night weren't headed for the venue. We had 60 calls holding inside of hotels where people had huddled up at various hotels. Were calling 911 saying, I'm shot, I'm injured. But our dispatchers, and I'll talk about them in a minute, the dispatchers decided, through their questioning, determined they weren't mortally wounded, they weren't critically wounded, told them to shelter in place. We deployed those task forces to go into that area, not knowing if there was gunfire, not knowing if there was anything going on there, why those people were shot, because we still hadn't vetted out the other reports of shooters. We sent those task forces in there to clear out those 60 calls. 1 second, I did omit by mistake the Las Vegas Fire and Rescue Fire Alarm Office. They dispatch for Clark County Fire, Las Vegas Fire and Rescue, and North Las Vegas Fire. They did a tremendous job on what is normally a routine Sunday night. They handled calls, and if you've ever had an opportunity to sit on a call takers panel and listen to a citizen, another person, in absolute sheer terror for their life, for their loved one, those men and women in that dispatch office did a phenomenal job. They are heroes that just sat in one building and handled the phone calls, but they're heroes because they handled that business. They got people to where they needed to be. They handled the needs and resource requests of us as a fire department and as chief officers looking for our help. So I have to applaud them as they did a tremendous job. Yes?
Chief Counsel, you mentioned this is going to change fire service across the country. Have other agencies reached out to you? And if so, what are you telling them at this point?
Yes, we have taught some of this across the country. Captains Kittleson and Hanna have taught this many times. I've had the opportunity to do it myself at some of the fire chief level venues that I've been to. And I could not even begin to count the number of phone calls, texts, emails I've received from my counterparts in the country, Canada, England that I've interacted with over the years, to one say, good job, and others to say, hey, I remember you talking about that at our conference. Thank you. Could you send it to me again, because we really need to take another look at it. And many of them said, you hit it out of the park. You guys hit it out of the park. That was something that nobody had ever planned for, and you guys handled it, and we did.
Chief?
Yes, sir.
Could you explain in more detail how you mentioned that some of the victims were going to various hospitals and then reporting that there was a shooter at that, at that hotel. How did that make the situation more difficult for you? And then after that, if there's someone here who's actually on scene, if they could describe the scene for us.
Okay, well, people that were on scene will speak when we're done. You can interview them. But as far as the reports of those other hotels, what that does is that complicates the matter. We know we got a lot of things going on here in the immediate area around that concert venue, but when you get a 911 call saying we've got shots fired at Caesar's Palace or we've got shots fired at a hotel as far away as Spring Mountain, that complicates our response. What is going on in our town? Is this a single event, or are we now under a Mumbai-style attack where we've got multiple things going on in multiple properties? So we had to handle that, and the police department did a wonderful job, and especially tied in with our firefighters that did a wonderful job.
Chief Castle?
Yes, sir.
Is there an estimate of time before the last patient was transported to the hospital, or what time you guys were there?
I don't have an end time on transports to hospitals. Yep. Yes.
You talk about the training and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about things or stories about things that they did that maybe you don't learn in training or you don't learn in a textbook, but in the moment it was the right thing to do?
Things that we learned in the moment. Well, I can't really expand on that right now because I haven't had a chance to talk to all of them to see what they improvised on. I mean, we train on a lot of things. We have a good equipment and tactics that we employ. Any on-scene improvisations, I really can't speak to right now because I haven't had that many conversations with the men and women right now that were there that night. Yes, sir.
That first crew that was driving down the street and they were overwhelmed, what did they do at that point?
They began to treat patients and call for additional resources, which is exactly what we would expect them to do. Yes, sir.
Can you tell us those additional resources that came in, where did you have them staged and when were they allowed to move into the area where you knew you had an active shooter, the concert venue general area?
Well, they were coming from every single direction, northeast, south, and west. And they were headed to what would have been a designed staging area. However, almost all of them encountered patients extracting in every direction. So they began to set up in those areas. So as far as getting into the concert venue itself, we had our unit that just happened to be right there when it happened. But those units inbound were treating patients immediately from Tropicana all the way to Russell, in behind hotels, in behind the church. There was a lot of places where people ended up. So like I said, if this was contained in a building or a single address, we would have set up stage area, we would have deployed resources from there. We never got to that point because all the inbound resources were met with a bunch of people they needed to handle.
When were you able to actually get people into the concert venue? How long did that take?
It was quickly. We had people in there. Radio traffic's pretty jumbled, but within minutes we had people at the gates of that venue. People were still running out, and as they're encountering people running out, they're trying to assist them in getting out. So we were there very quickly.
Can you break down the 108 firefighters you mentioned? Were those all Clark County, or did that include numbers from Las Vegas and the other jurisdictions you mentioned? Where were they from?
Yeah. So he's kind of giving me a little brief update right now. It was 108 from Clark County. It's 160 overall as we looked at the books, and that's why I have the gentleman from my other entities here. I have Operations Chief Ray Kessler from City Las Vegas Fire, Fire Chief Joel Calhoun from North Las Vegas Fire, and a longtime friend of mine, Doug Koopman from Henderson Fire. And I had them here specifically because every single entity, fire-wise, was there. Every single one. Yes?
Can you talk about the nature of the injuries, given the types of weapons that were used, and what challenges that brought compared to other things you've dealt with in the past?
Well, we had a very wide range of injuries, from trample-type injuries to sprains and strains and fractures, people trying to get out and getting over fences and walls, lacerations from those types of things. But we did have those unfortunate high-powered weapon rounds that struck people and caused the damage that high-powered weapons do.
Can you talk about how that compares to what you dealt with in the past? Is it more difficult to treat those in the moment, or is it just a matter of triaging and getting folks out?
it's a matter of triaging and getting folks out as fast as we can. So, yes?
We talked a bit about the movement incident command. Two questions about that. Is it possible for you to say what it was like before you started operating like that with the police department? And also, did you think an incident like this was inevitable in Las Vegas?
Okay, so the first part of your question, the incident command system and tying in with the police department. 10 years ago, I can say, and I believe I would have the agreement of my friends over at Metro, this would have been much worse on the command and control side. More people would have died because we weren't able to engage as fast as we can with them to do what we needed to do. So 10 years ago, this would have been a much worse event. As for do we anticipate or plan on an event like this in our community? We have. We have thought that something's coming down the pipe. This is the world that we live in, unfortunately. We're in a venue of soft targets, our community. We're an international tourist destination. We're a target, and we know that. And an example of that is placing a deputy chief over that responsibility to integrate and make sure that we're tied in and we're doing the right things with the hotels, we're doing the right things with our law enforcement partners. Yes, sir.
Did you get any calls about smoke or possible fire in Mandalay Bay Hotel, especially on the 32nd floor with the weather?
We had calls, and from standing in the middle of the street, we could look up and see the alarms going off in the building. We made a phone call over there and said, do you have a fire? Because we didn't have anybody to send. At that point in time, we had nobody available to send that was close. We had to bring units from a long ways away. And because our fire alarm office and their professionalism and their dedication, they were immediately able to ping over to Mandalay Bay, came right back and said it's a result of police activity. So we knew we didn't have a fire, but the alarms did go off at the hotel.
On the 32nd floor or other floors?
32nd floor, and usually they're in a group of 3 or 4. I can't speak exact. That's the inspection.
Did you get other calls? You're overtaxed. Did you get calls for just house fires, your routine stuff, and how do you handle that?
That's a very good question. So, what we call Mrs. Smith, right? Mrs. Smith is our code name for the citizens. We still had calls. Mrs. Smith was still having heart attacks. People were still having traffic accidents. They were still getting sick. They were still having minor events that we responded to. So, our system was very, very busy that night. In that event right there, we have a move-up system from our partners. Henderson Fire starts shuffling resources to fill the gaps. North Vegas, City Las Vegas, they fill in those gaps so we can minimize our response times when these things happen, and we have a tremendous amount of resources centralized in one area.
Chief Counsel, your reaction
Yes.
to all those off-duty first responders who were concert goers and went into action, they were there on the ground?
Absolute heroes. Absolute heroes. They didn't have any equipment with them. They didn't have any protection. They were on site. But through their training, they knew they've got to react. They've got to get some tourniquets on. They've got to take belts and make tourniquets. They've got to do things to try and save people's lives. They've got to help carry people out. Absolute heroes. Everybody inside that venue that is helping people, absolute heroes. Citizens, off-duty fire and EMS and PD personnel, and the standby personnel.
Did you guys use the equipment, the ballistic equipment that you showed us here?
When I arrived, every single person that I saw was in ballistic gear. Yes. Yes.
Was any of the gear pierced or damaged? Were anyone struck but saved by the gear?
No, we had none of our personnel took rounds, and none of our personnel were hurt in this response. Actually, we had one gentleman suffered a knee injury from one of the other fire departments, but that was not related to the incident. It was related to gravity. He got tripped. Yes, sir.
Can you talk about the reason you guys started to train with police for biology in the first place?
We started because we saw what happened at Columbine. We saw what happened in Aurora, Colorado, and we saw from the reports of how these people died and the lack of interaction at some points with the police departments, and we knew we had to fix that. Yes.
Follow up to an earlier question. So did you have staff inside Mandalay Bay, specifically up on the 32nd floor during the night?
We did not. Okay, I'll take 2 more questions. I'll take no more questions. Thank you for your attendance today, and I want to reiterate, these gentlemen right here in the front row, they were either there enjoying the event and got thrown into this mess, or those that responded from their stations, or those of us that came in from home. Thank you. Thank you very much. And please, please be gentle on my people. They are not PR trained specialists, so please be gentle with them. Thank you.
What's that? MCI.
Oh, the MCI rig is out back. For those that wish to go outside, we do have it out there. I've seen Pat's. We've shifted it out to the front. See, I get all my updates on the fly. This is how we work. It's out front, so anybody wants to go out and look around that, you can see what our vehicle is. So, thank you. Good job. Thanks, man. Thanks. Appreciate you guys.
Chief, can I ask